Over the weekend, the United States, joined by the United Kingdom and France, led airstrikes on Syria's chemical warfare facilities. The military action was in response to a chemical attack which killed 75 people, including children, allegedly carried out by the Syrian government. To find out more, Carolee McGrath sat down with Gary Lefort, a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army and professor of international business at American International College. Lefort served 8 years in the Pentagon and brings us his perspective on the latest developments.
Well, I think it was a good military action. The first one was about a year ago, if you recall, where the same thing happened, and now we see it happening again. I think the reason why the response wasn't as quickly is because I think the situation was a little different. There was still some intelligence gathering that was going on that did not definitely, without a doubt, point to Assad as being the one responsible for it. I think Trump was also trying to get a coalition force this time, which really made sense. As you know, he ended up getting the UK and France involved. The three of them represent permanent members of the Security Council. And I think also they had to make sure that the targets that they hit did not create any civilian casualty and Russian casualties, especially considering the Russians were so vocal about the fact that if there was a military attack, they would intervene. But when it was all said and done, the incident happened on April 17th, and the attack took place on April 13th, and it was a precision attack, and certainly sent a clear message that the international community was not going to continue to tolerate, chemical attacks like this on innocent people.
So the attack had killed 75 people, including many children, the chemical attack. Of course, Russia, backing Syria, says that didn't happen. Mm-hmm. So how do we get to the bottom of that? I know there are investigators that are going in now trying to get to the bottom of the chemical attack and have even been blocked, or reports that they've been blocked as well by the Russians.
Yeah. And part of the argument that's being used is that part of Russia's way of intervening, saying that they're going to stand in the way. Even though you can't help but say, why would they do that? I mean, if, in fact, like the Russians say, it was not done by Assad, but was done by the rebels, then why wouldn't he want, an international weapons chemical prevention group to come in to make the assessment and vindicate Assad? It sort of leaves the impression that, maybe Assad was, in fact, involved, because that's what's all the intelligence is saying, that the type of aircraft that was used, which was a helicopter, the type of bomb, it was a barrel bomb. These are assets that the rebel forces just didn't have. The only place that it could come from was from the Syrian army. And what raises the question is, what did the Russians know about it? And that may be one of the reasons of why, they're kind of standing in the way, because if they can be drawn into it as well, in other words, they knew about it and didn't do anything to stop the attack, it makes them look, just as bad.
So what do you do? So Britain's foreign minister says that this is not about regime change, which becomes a whole other topic, but this is about really sending a clear message on chemical weapons. Is that an effective way, to get their attention? Or, what happens the next time this happens in Syria?
Well, hopefully it doesn't happen again. Obviously if it happens again, then you have to start considering a much broader based attack. For example, taking out all of their air assets. I think one of the reasons why they didn't do it this particular time is because of the time lag between when the attack was and when we retaliated. Assad had an opportunity to move around these aircraft to air bases where the Russian forces were located. Maybe even possibly moving around chemical, assets as well. So if it should happen again, I mean, it raises the question that you have to take more drastic, actions that could include going after higher value assets, not just military, but government related as well. Obviously, the big concern is your collateral damage will be much broader base, not just at government or military assets, but possibly, civilians as well.
And also the concern of becoming more and more involved in a conflict in Syria. So let's talk a little bit about...
Sure, especially with Russia, not just Syria, but with Russia.
Right. And so this civil war started 7 years ago,
It started
2011.
in 2011.
So 400,000 people at least have been
and
killed.
it's been approaching, 500,000.
Since
11,
that time.
12 million people, either displaced or refugees, roughly half the country's population, with currently no relief in sight.
So you have Assad, you had ISIS. Where does the U.S. stand as far as their military involvement? How many troops are there, and who we're supporting, and who's really the good guy for the Syrian people?
Okay, I guess you would say probably the one that seems to be most proactive as far as the Syrian people go would probably be the Syrian Democratic Forces, which includes the Kurdish people, and also Arab forces from Saudi Arabia and other countries outside of Syria. Their focus really has been to destroy ISIS. Now, there is the Syrian Free Force, which really represents the rebel group within the country that really wants to overthrow Assad because he's seen as an oppressive leader that has taken advantage of his people.
So what do you do about Russia? Obviously, there's increased tensions, but is there a way to get to Russia to force a change in this whole situation?
Well, I think what the United States is currently trying to do is use economic sanctions. There's been a number of sanctions put in the past on them for the presidential elections in 2016, for the recent poisoning of an ex-spy in the UK. Those economic sanctions, coupled with the economic sanction that they're now discussing about Russia's involvement in the chemical attacks, puts a lot of pressure on Russia right now at a time where they really can't afford it. President Putin just won a new election. He's trying to show the Russian people that he has a better way of life for them. And when he gets, bogged down in a war that's going on in Syria, that's going to take more and more resources, not only in terms of troops, but also in terms of financial resources, that's going to put a lot of pressure to bear on him. And so hopefully that type of pressure will eventually force him to reconsider his position in Syria. Is it really financially, worth his while to continue to support a regime that eventually is going to end up falling because the rebel group, even though it's been somewhat contained because of the assistance of Russia, eventually it's not going to go away, and so it becomes a perpetual civil war that just drags you down, especially if you're, the principal ally of the government that's in power at the time, which is Assad.